The distant rumble of thunder matched the pounding hooves as dust billowed across the arid Montana landscape. Beatrice Walters clutched her bouquet tightly, her white wedding dress a stark contrast against the weathered interior of the Carson and Wells stagecoach as it hurtled down the narrow mountain pass. It was 1875, and what should have been the happiest day of her 22-year-old life had transformed into a nightmare of splintering wood and terrified screams. "The horses are spooked," the driver shouted as the coach lurched violently. "I can't hold him." Beatrice braced herself against the seat, her stepmother Judith falling against her as the wheels hit another rock. Through the small window, she could see only disaster ahead, a sharp turn with nothing but open air and 100-foot drop beyond. "We're going to die," Judith whispered, her face ashen with fear. Half a mile away, Hudson Quinn rode along the ridge, his stallion Tempest maintaining an easy canter. At 30, Hudson had spent most of his adult life as a hired gun and tracker, though lately he'd begun to wonder if there wasn't more to life than wandering from town to town. His weathered Stetson shaded piercing blue eyes that missed nothing, including the runaway stagecoach careening toward the ravine's edge. Without hesitation, he dug his heels into Tempest's sides. "Hiya!" The stallion shot forward, powerful muscles bunching as they raced at an angle to intercept the stagecoach's path. Inside the coach, Beatrice's hands bled from gripping the leather straps as the vehicle tilted precariously. The luggage on top had come loose, tumbling alongside them as the driver desperately fought the panicked horses. "Jump!" the driver shouted to his shotgun rider. Just before being thrown from his seat, Beatrice saw the ravine approaching, a yawning chasm that promised certain death. She closed her eyes, silently saying goodbye to all the dreams she'd held for her future. The thundering of hooves grew closer. Hudson pushed Tempest to his limit, the distance closing between them and the careening stagecoach. He could see a flash of white through the window, a woman in what looked like a wedding dress. Gritting his teeth, he urged Tempest even faster, pulling alongside the coach as it skidded dangerously close to the edge. With one fluid motion, Hudson stood in the stirrups, gauged the distance, and leapt from his horse onto the side of the stagecoach. His fingers found purchase on the roof rail as the coach lurched, nearly sending him flying. Using every ounce of strength, he pulled himself up and crawled toward the door. The horses screamed in terror as the front wheels slipped over the edge of the ravine. Hudson yanked the door open to find two women inside, one older and one young bride in white, her veil torn and her eyes wide with terror. "Give me your hand," he shouted, reaching in as the coach teetered on the brink. Beatrice stared at the stranger, time seeming to slow as their eyes met. Without thinking, she thrust her hand into his. His grip was like iron as he pulled her toward the door. "There's no time," he yelled as the coach groaned, wood splintering beneath them. With one powerful motion, Hudson yanked Beatrice free of the stagecoach just as it broke apart. She found herself airborne for a terrifying moment, before landing hard against his chest as they tumbled to the ground. "Judith!" Beatrice screamed, watching in horror as the coach and her stepmother disappeared over the edge, the sickening sound of shattering wood echoing up from the ravine below. Hudson held her tightly as she struggled against him, preventing her from running to the edge. "It's too late," he said grimly. "She's gone." Beatrice collapsed against him, her wedding dress covered in dust and torn at the hem, her body racked with sobs. Several yards away, Tempest had stopped and was now watching them, as if knowing his master would need him again soon. "I'm sorry," Hudson said, his voice softer now as he awkwardly patted her shoulder. "I couldn't save both of you." Beatrice pulled back, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "You saved me. I don't even know your name." "Hudson Quinn," he replied, helping her to her feet. "Most folks just call me Quinn." "Beatrice Walters," she said, then looked down at her ruined dress with a bitter laugh. "Or it would have been Beatrice Morrison by sundown." Hudson glanced around, noting the scattered luggage and the approaching storm clouds. "We need to find shelter before that storm hits. My camp's about an hour's ride from here." "But the others? We should search for survivors," Beatrice said, moving toward the edge of the ravine. Hudson gently caught her arm. "Miss Walters, no one could have survived that fall. The best thing we can do is get to safety and then bring back help from the nearest town." Beatrice looked at the darkening sky, then at the stranger who had saved her life. She had been traveling to Silver Creek to marry a man she'd only met twice, a business arrangement her father had made before his death last winter. Now her stepmother was dead, her few possessions scattered, and she was alone with a rugged cowboy in the middle of nowhere. "I don't have much choice, do I?" she finally said. Hudson gave her a slight nod and whistled for Tempest. The horse trotted over obediently. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Beatrice said, gathering her torn skirts. "My father owned a ranch before he lost it. I've been riding since I was a child." Hudson looked impressed as he helped her mount Tempest. He gathered a few salvageable items from the scattered luggage, a small carpet bag that must have been hers, judging by the feminine embroidery, and a canteen that had miraculously remained intact. "Hold tight," he instructed as he swung up behind her. "It's going to be a rough ride with the two of us, but Tempest can handle it." Beatrice stiffened at the unexpected proximity of this stranger, his chest solid against her back as he reached around to take the reins. But as the first fat raindrops began to fall, she found herself grateful for his warmth. They rode in silence for a time, the only sounds the steady rhythm of Tempest's hooves and the increasing patter of rain. Eventually, Hudson spoke, his voice close to her ear. "Were you heading to Silver Creek for your wedding?" Beatrice nodded, raindrops sliding down her cheeks, indistinguishable from tears. "Yes. Edgar Morrison was to be my husband, a wealthy mine owner. I've never actually been to Silver Creek before." Hudson made a non-committal sound. "I know Morrison, by reputation anyway." Something in his tone made Beatrice turn slightly. "And what reputation is that?" Hudson hesitated. "Just that he's a successful businessman, known for getting what he wants." "He was my father's choice," Beatrice said quietly. "After father died, there wasn't much left. The bank took the ranch. Judith thought it was a good match." The rain was falling steadily now, soaking through her already ruined wedding dress. Hudson urged Tempest to a faster pace, and Beatrice clung to the saddle horn as the terrain grew more difficult. "There," Hudson pointed to a small cabin nestled among the pines ahead. "My current residence. It's not much, but it's dry." The cabin was indeed modest, a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a collection of supplies neatly organized along one wall. Hudson helped Beatrice dismount, her legs nearly buckling from the strain of the ride. "I need to see to Tempest," he said, avoiding her eyes. "There are some dry clothes in that trunk. They'll be too big, but they're better than staying in that wet dress. I'll give you privacy." Beatrice stood dripping on the rough wooden floor, watching as Hudson led Tempest to a lean-to attached to the side of the cabin. When the door closed behind him, she moved to the trunk he'd indicated and found a clean shirt and pair of trousers that would indeed swallow her whole. With numb fingers, she struggled with the dozens of tiny buttons down the back of her wedding dress, suddenly furious at the elaborate garment that seemed to symbolize everything wrong with her life. After several frustrating minutes, she heard a knock at the door. "Miss Walters, are you decent?" "I've got some firewood." I can't get the buttons," she admitted, mortified. "There are too many." There was a long pause. "Would you like me to help?" I promised to be a gentleman. Beatrice closed her eyes, weighing her limited options. "Yes, please." Hudson entered cautiously, his hat in his hands and his eyes averted until she indicated she was ready. His fingers were surprisingly nimble as they worked down the long row of buttons, careful not to touch her skin. "Thank you," she whispered when he finished, clutching the bodice to her chest. "I'll start the fire," he said gruffly, turning away. "Take your time." Once changed into Hudson's oversized clothing, Beatrice felt marginally better. She'd managed to salvage her chemise, which was only slightly damp, but had discarded the heavy, sodden wedding dress in a heap by the trunk. Her hair, usually pinned in an elaborate style, hung in damp waves down her back after she removed the remaining pins. Hudson had a fire crackling in the hearth and was brewing coffee in a battered pot. By the time she emerged from behind the privacy screen, he'd improvised with a blanket. "The rain's getting worse," he observed, pouring her a cup of the strong black coffee. "We won't be able to make it to town until tomorrow at the earliest." Beatrice accepted the cup gratefully, warming her hands around it. "I should send word to Edgar. He'll be wondering what happened to me." Hudson added wood to the fire. "First light, I'll ride to Silver Creek and let them know about the accident. They'll send men to recover the others." Reality crashed back over Beatrice like a wave. Judith was dead. The driver and guard were dead. She should be dead too, if not for this quiet, intense man who'd risked his life for a stranger. "Why did you do it?" she asked suddenly. "Why risk your life for people you didn't know?" Hudson looked up, firelight dancing across his features, the strong jaw, the faint scar across his left cheekbone, the eyes that seemed to hold more stories than he would ever tell. "Wouldn't anyone?" he asked simply. "No," Beatrice replied. Not anyone would leap from a horse onto a runaway stagecoach teetering on the edge of a ravine. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps I've done too many things I'm not proud of. Saving you seemed like a chance to balance the scales." That night, Beatrice slept in Hudson's bed while he made a pallet by the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, interrupted by nightmares of falling and the sickening sound of splintering wood. Once she woke with a cry and found Hudson immediately at her side, a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Just a dream," he murmured. "You're safe now." In the soft glow of the banked fire, with rain pattering on the roof and the nightmare still clinging to the edges of her mind, Beatrice found herself gripping his hand like a lifeline. "Stay," she whispered. "Just sit here until I fall asleep again. Please." Hudson settled on the floor beside the bed, his back against the wall, still holding her hand. "I'll be right here." When morning came, Beatrice woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window and the smell of something cooking. Hudson stood at the small stove, frying bacon in a cast iron pan. "Good morning," he said, glancing over at her. "Hope you're hungry." Beatrice sat up, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance and the fact that she was wearing this stranger's clothes. "I should look like a proper lady when we go to town," she said, eyeing her ruined wedding dress. Hudson paused. "I've been thinking about that. Given what happened, there's no shame in arriving as you are. But if you prefer, I found a dress in one of the bags we salvaged. It's a bit damp still, but I hung it by the fire overnight." The dress was simple, navy blue with white piping, one of Judith's traveling dresses. Beatrice felt a pang of loss as she ran her fingers over the familiar fabric. Over a breakfast of bacon and biscuits, Hudson explained his plan. "We'll ride to Silver Creek together. I know the sheriff there, Frank Caldwell. Good man. I'll tell him about the accident and he can send men to the ravine while I take you to Morrison." Beatrice nodded, pushing food around her plate. What will you do after that? Hudson shrugged. Move on, I suppose. I never stay in one place too long. Why is that? He met her eyes briefly, then looked away. Just the way I am. They set out mid-morning, Beatrice once again riding double with Hudson on Tempest. The day was clear and bright, a stark contrast to yesterday's violence. As they rode, Hudson pointed out landmarks and shared bits of information about the area. Those mountains to the north are where I do most of my hunting, he said. Good elk country up there. Is that how you make your living, hunting? Sometimes. I've been a lot of things. Bounty hunter for a while, scout for the army during the war, did some ranch work, some mining. A true man of the West, Beatrice observed. Hudson laughed, a surprising sound that transformed his face. Just a man who hasn't found his place yet, I think. They stopped to rest Tempest at a small stream around midday. As Beatrice splashed cool water on her face, she noticed Hudson watching her with an unreadable expression. What is it? She asked. Just thinking it's strange how lives intersect, he replied. Yesterday morning, I didn't know you existed. Now I can't imagine not having pulled you from that coach. A warmth that had nothing to do with the sun spread through Beatrice's chest. I'm rather glad our lives intersected as well, Mr. Quinn. Hudson, he corrected. After sharing a cabin, I think we can use first names. Hudson, she repeated, liking the sound of it. They reached Silver Creek by late afternoon, the mining town bustling with activity. Wooden buildings lined the main street, with Morrison Mining Company's imposing headquarters dominating one end. People stopped to stare as Hudson and Beatrice rode in, her borrowed dress and his protective arm around her waist causing eyebrows to raise. The sheriff's office was a squat building with a cell visible through the front window. Hudson helped Beatrice dismount, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. Sheriff Caldwell, Hudson called as they entered. Got a situation needs your attention. Frank Caldwell was a barrel-chested man with a walrus mustache and sharp eyes that missed nothing, including the way Hudson stood close to Beatrice. Quinn, he nodded. Didn't expect to see you in town again so soon. And who might this be? Beatrice Walters, she introduced herself. I was a passenger on the Carson and Wells stagecoach that was due in yesterday. Caldwell's expression darkened. We've had folks worried sick about that coach. Morrison's been in here twice already, demanding I send out a search party. Hudson explained about the accident, his voice steady as he described the stagecoach plunging into the ravine. I managed to pull Miss Walters out, but her stepmother and the coach staff were lost. Good God, Caldwell muttered, scribbling notes. I'll send men out right away. And I'll need to inform Mr. Morrison that his bride is alive, if a bit worse for wear. I can tell him myself, Beatrice said, her voice stronger than she felt. He deserves to hear it from me. Caldwell and Hudson exchanged a look she couldn't interpret. As you wish, Miss Walters, the sheriff said. Morrison's likely at his office at this hour. Outside, Hudson hesitated. I should probably make myself scarce when you meet with Morrison. Why? Beatrice asked. You saved my life. Surely he'll want to thank you. Hudson's jaw tightened. Morrison and I have history, not the friendly kind. Before Beatrice could press further, a commotion from down the street caught their attention. A well-dressed man was striding toward them, flanked by two burlier men. Even at a distance, Beatrice recognized her fiancé, Edgar Morrison. Beatrice. He called, quickening his pace. My God, it is you. When the coach didn't arrive, I feared the worst. Edgar reached them, his hands extending to grasp Beatrice's shoulders as his eyes scanned her for injury. He was handsome in a conventional way, tall, broad-shouldered, with carefully groomed dark hair and a neat mustache. At 40, he was nearly twice Beatrice's age, but her father had assured her that an established man would provide security she couldn't find with a younger husband. "Edgar," she greeted him, suddenly aware of how she must appear wearing a borrowed dress, her hair loose, standing beside a rugged stranger. Edgar's relief gave way to confusion, then suspicion as his gaze shifted to Hudson. "Quinn," he said flatly, "what are you doing with my fiancée?" "Saving her life," Hudson replied evenly. Edgar's face flushed. "What happened? Where is Mrs. Walters? Why weren't you on the morning coach as planned?" Beatrice explained about the accident, watching Edgar's expression shift from concern to calculation and back again. "If not for Hudson, I would have died with the others," she concluded. Edgar's jaw worked as he processed this information. Finally, he turned to Hudson with obvious reluctance. "It seems I owe you my gratitude, Quinn." "Don't mention it," Hudson replied coldly. "Nevertheless," Edgar continued, "I insist you accept a reward. $500 seems appropriate for returning my bride safely." Hudson's eyes hardened. "I didn't do it for money, Morrison." Edgar placed a possessive arm around Beatrice's shoulders. "Come, my dear. You've had a terrible ordeal. My housekeeper will draw you a bath, and we'll postpone the wedding until you've had time to recover from your stepmother's tragic passing." Beatrice found herself being steered away, but she turned back to look at Hudson. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Hudson touched the brim of his hat. "Madam." As Edgar led her toward his grand house on the hill overlooking Silver Creek, Beatrice felt a strange emptiness, as if she'd left something essential behind with the quiet cowboy still standing in the dusty street. Edgar's home was everything her father had promised: a 3-story mansion with polished floors, velvet draperies, and more rooms than Beatrice could count. A staff of servants appeared to attend to her every need, whisking away Judith's borrowed dress and bringing a copper tub filled with steaming, scented water. "You'll feel more yourself after a bath and proper meal," Edgar assured her, hovering in the doorway of what would be her room until the wedding. "We can discuss the arrangements tomorrow." Alone in the luxurious bedroom, Beatrice sank into the tub, the hot water soothing her bruised body but doing nothing to calm her troubled mind. Images flashed before her: the coach teetering on the edge, Hudson's strong hand reaching for hers, his eyes in the firelight as he kept her nightmares at bay. Why had there been such tension between Hudson and Edgar? What history did they share? The next morning, dressed in clothes Edgar had hastily ordered from the town dressmaker, Beatrice joined her fiancé for breakfast in a dining room that could have seated 20. Edgar was reading a newspaper, which he folded neatly as she entered. "You look much improved," he observed, "though still a bit pale. The doctor will visit this afternoon to ensure you suffered no lasting effects from your ordeal." "That's very considerate," Beatrice said, taking a seat as a maid poured coffee. "Has there been any news about the recovery?" Edgar nodded grimly. "Sheriff Caldwell sent men to the ravine at first light. They've recovered the bodies. The funeral for your stepmother will be held tomorrow if you feel strong enough to attend." "Of course I'll attend," Beatrice said, fighting back tears. Despite their sometimes strained relationship, Judith had been her only family since her father's death. "I've taken the liberty of postponing our wedding by 2 weeks," Edgar continued, buttering a piece of toast. "A suitable mourning period while still allowing us to be married before winter sets in." 2 weeks seems rather brief for mourning," Beatrice ventured. Edgar's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your father would have wanted us to proceed with our plans, my dear. The merger of our family's interests was very important to him." Beatrice sipped her coffee to hide her discomfort at his phrasing. "Speaking of family interests, I was wondering about your history with Mr. Quinn." Edgar's hand stilled momentarily. "Quinn?" A regrettable business conflict, nothing that need concern you. The man is little more than a drifter with questionable morals. I'm grateful he saved you, of course, but he's not someone with whom we'll be socializing." "He seemed honorable to me," Beatrice said carefully. "He could have taken advantage of our situation but behaved as a perfect gentleman." Edgar's eyes narrowed slightly. "Let's not speak of him again. The man has a violent past and associates with undesirable elements. Now, I must attend to some business at the mine, but I'll return for dinner. Perhaps you'd like to rest today. You've been through quite an ordeal." After Edgar departed, Beatrice found herself restless in the large, quiet house. The staff, while polite, seemed hesitant to engage with her beyond the most basic interactions. Eventually, she asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, if she might walk into town. "Mr. Morrison prefers the ladies of the house to use the carriage when going into town," Mrs. Finch replied primly. "Shall I have Thomas bring it around?" "That won't be necessary," Beatrice said. "I enjoy walking and the fresh air would do me good." Mrs. Finch's disapproval was evident, but she merely sniffed and said, "As you wish, Miss Walters, but Mr. Morrison won't like it." Silver Creek in daylight was a study in contrasts, the elegant shops and offices on Main Street giving way to rougher establishments as one moved toward the edges of town. Beatrice walked slowly, nodding politely to curious townspeople who clearly recognized her as Morrison's intended. She found herself outside the sheriff's office, hesitating before gathering her courage and stepping inside. Sheriff Caldwell looked up from his desk, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Miss Walters," he greeted her, "what can I do for you today?" "I was wondering if you'd seen Mr. Quinn," Beatrice said, trying to sound casual. "I wanted to thank him properly for saving my life." Caldwell leaned back in his chair. "Quinn left town early this morning, said something about heading up to his cabin to collect his things before moving on." Disappointment washed over Beatrice with unexpected force. "He's leaving the area." "That's Quinn for you," Caldwell said, studying her reaction. "Never stays in one place too long, especially not where Edgar Morrison holds sway." Beatrice seized the opening. "Sheriff, what exactly happened between Mr. Morrison and Mr. Quinn?" Edgar was rather vague about it. Caldwell stroked his mustache, clearly debating how much to share. "Not my place to tell tales, Miss Walters, but since you're marrying into this town, you'll hear it eventually. 5 years back, Quinn was working as a guard for the silver shipments from Morrison's mine. There was a robbery attempt, and Morrison accused Quinn of being in on it. Was he? No evidence either way. The money was recovered and the other robbers killed in the attempt. Morrison wanted Quinn hung, but there wasn't enough proof. Since then, there's been no love lost between them." "I see," Beatrice said thoughtfully. "Thank you for telling me, Sheriff." As she turned to leave, Caldwell called after her, "Miss Walters, Quinn's a good man, despite what some in this town might say. One of the best trackers I've ever known, and straight as an arrow when it comes to his word." Outside, Beatrice found herself walking toward the edge of town, toward the mountains where Hudson's cabin stood. The idea forming in her mind was impulsive, possibly foolish, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to see him one more time before he disappeared from her life forever. At the general store, she purchased a few supplies and inquired about hiring a horse. The shopkeeper, Mr. Abernathy, eyed her fine dress skeptically. "Planning a picnic, Miss Walters?" "Something like that," she replied with a smile she hoped appeared casual. "I've been cooped up after my ordeal and thought some time in nature might restore my spirits." "Well, my boy can saddle you a gentle mare, but you ought to take someone with you. These mountains ain't safe for a lady alone." "I won't go far," Beatrice promised. An hour later, mounted on a placid chestnut mare, and with basic directions to Hudson's cabin, Beatrice left Silver Creek behind. The late September day was perfect for riding warm sunshine, a gentle breeze, and the mountains ahead ablaze with the first touches of autumn color. The trail grew steeper and narrower as she climbed, and Beatrice found herself grateful for the years spent riding on her father's ranch. Even so, by the time she spotted smoke rising from a chimney through the trees ahead, her muscles ached, and the afternoon was waning. Hudson's cabin looked different in daylight, smaller, more weathered, but with a certain rustic charm that the grand Morrison mansion lacked. Tempest was tethered outside, and various supplies were stacked beside the door, confirming the sheriff's statement that Hudson was preparing to leave. As Beatrice dismounted, the cabin door opened and Hudson stepped out, a rifle in his hands. When he recognized her, his expression shifted from wariness to astonishment. "Beatrice, what in God's name are you doing out here alone?" "I came to see you," she said simply, suddenly uncertain of her impulsive decision. "Sheriff Caldwell said you were leaving." Hudson lowered the rifle, looking past her as if expecting to see others following. "Does Morrison know you're here?" "No," she admitted. "I told his housekeeper I was going for a walk in town." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "This is considerably more than a walk. May I come in?" Beatrice asked, gesturing to the cabin. It was a long ride. Hudson hesitated, then nodded, holding the door for her. Inside, the cabin was much as she remembered, though most of Hudson's possessions were now packed in crates and saddlebags. "You really are leaving?" she said softly. "No reason to stay," Hudson replied, pouring water from a pitcher into a cup and offering it to her. Silver Creek was never meant to be a permanent stop. Beatrice drank gratefully, then set down the cup with more force than intended. "I spoke with Sheriff Caldwell. He told me about what happened 5 years ago with the robbery." Hudson's expression hardened. "Did he now?" "Not details. Just that Morrison accused you of being involved, but there was no proof." "There was no proof because I wasn't involved," Hudson said tersely. "But Morrison has never let facts interfere with his opinions." Beatrice studied his face, those blue eyes that had haunted her thoughts since the moment he'd pulled her from the stagecoach. "I believe you." Something in Hudson's expression softened. "Why did you really come here, Beatrice?" "I don't know," she admitted. I couldn't let you disappear without saying goodbye properly, without thanking you." "You already thanked me." "Not enough." She moved closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. "Not nearly enough." For a long moment, they stood facing each other, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Hudson stepped back, breaking the spell. "You should get back to town before dark," he said roughly. "It's not safe in these mountains at night." Beatrice felt a stab of disappointment but knew he was right. "When will you leave?" "Tomorrow, most likely. I'm heading north, maybe to Montana Territory." She nodded, fighting an inexplicable urge to ask him to stay. "Will you at least come to Judith's funeral? It's tomorrow at noon." Hudson ran a hand through his hair. "I don't think Morrison would appreciate my presence." "I would," Beatrice said simply. Outside, as Hudson helped her mount the mare, his hands strong and sure at her waist, Beatrice looked down at him with sudden clarity. "I don't want to marry Edgar," she blurted out. Hudson froze. "What?" "I never wanted to marry him. It was my father's arrangement, not mine, being here in this town, in that house. It feels wrong, like I'm walking into a cage." "Beatrice," Hudson said carefully, "you're upset. You've been through a terrible ordeal. This isn't the time to make life-changing decisions." "When is the time, then?" "After I've said vows to a man I don't love. After I've trapped myself in a life I never chose." Hudson's expression was pained. "What are you asking me to do?" Beatrice hadn't known the answer until that moment. "Take me with you." He shook his head immediately. "I can't do that. You have a life here, responsibilities. To whom?" My parents are dead. I have no siblings, no close relatives. The only obligation I have is to a marriage contract I never wanted. You barely know me, Hudson pointed out. I'm not the settling type. I don't have money or land or anything to offer you. You offered me your hand when it mattered most, Beatrice said softly. That's worth more than all of Edgar's silver mines. Hudson closed his eyes briefly as if in pain. Go back to town, Beatrice. Go to your fiancé. Forget this conversation ever happened. Hurt and embarrassed, Beatrice straightened in the saddle. I'm sorry to have troubled you, Mr. Quinn. Goodbye. She turned the mare and started down the trail, tears burning behind her eyes. She'd made a fool of herself, misreading the situation completely. Of course, Hudson didn't want the burden of an inexperienced woman with no practical skills. Of course, he valued his freedom above all else. She was halfway down the mountain when she heard hoofbeats approaching rapidly from behind. Hudson and Tempest appeared alongside her, the stallion easily matching the mare's pace. You're right, Hudson said without preamble. You should have a choice in who you marry and how you live your life. But running away isn't the answer. Beatrice reined in her horse and Hudson did the same. What would you suggest then? Go back, talk to Morrison, tell him you need more time to consider the marriage. If he's a decent man, he'll understand. And if he doesn't, Hudson's jaw tightened, then you'll have learned something important about the man you're planning to marry. They rode back to Silver Creek together, mostly in silence, each lost in thought. As they reached the edge of town, Hudson pulled Tempest to a stop. This is where we part ways, he said. People will talk if they see you riding in with me. Beatrice knew he was right, but couldn't bear the finality of this goodbye. Will you at least consider staying for the funeral? It would mean a great deal to me. Hudson studied her face for a long moment. I'll think about it, he finally said. Take care of yourself, Beatrice Walters. And you, Hudson Quinn. She watched him ride away, his straight back and broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun, before turning her horse toward the Morrison mansion on the hill. Edgar was furious when she returned, his face flushed as he paced the parlor. Where have you been? Mrs. Finch said you went for a walk hours ago. I've had men searching the town for you. I went riding, Beatrice said calmly, removing her gloves. I needed time to think. Riding, alone. Edgar's voice rose incredulously. Do you have any idea how inappropriate that is? How dangerous? What were you thinking? Beatrice met his gaze steadily. I was thinking that I've spent my entire life doing what others expect of me. My father arranged our marriage without consulting me, and I accepted it because I felt I had no choice. Edgar stared at her, momentarily speechless. What are you saying? I'm saying that I would like to postpone our wedding, Beatrice replied. Not just for 2 weeks, indefinitely. Until I'm certain it's what I truly want. Edgar's expression darkened. This is about Quinn, isn't it? Did you go see him today? What lies has he been telling you? This isn't about Hudson, Beatrice said, though even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't entirely true. It's about me needing time. Edgar stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness. Your father promised you to me, Beatrice. The contracts are signed. The arrangements are made. You don't get to change your mind now because some drifter turned your head. A chill ran through Beatrice at his tone. I understand you had an agreement with my father, but surely my feelings matter in this. Your feelings. Edgar laughed harshly. My dear, marriage at our level isn't about feelings. It's about alliances, about property and bloodlines. Your father understood that, even if you don't. And if I refuse to marry you, Edgar's smile was cold. Then you'll find yourself alone in the world without a penny to your name or a roof over your head. Your father's debts exceeded his assets, which is why he arranged our marriage in the first place. I paid those debts in exchange for your hand. The truth of her situation hit Beatrice like a physical blow. She wasn't just promised to Edgar, she had been sold to him to cover her father's financial mistakes. "I see," she said quietly. "Then I have until the wedding to decide whether to honor my father's bargain or face destitution." Edgar's expression softened slightly, his tone becoming conciliatory. "It needn't be such a stark choice, my dear. I can be a generous husband. You'll want for nothing material. In time, you might even come to care for me." Beatrice doubted that very much, especially after seeing this calculating side of the man she was to marry. "I'll attend Judith's funeral tomorrow, and then I would like a few days alone to consider everything. Is that acceptable?" Edgar nodded, clearly believing he'd won. "Of course. Take all the time you need. The outcome is inevitable after all." That night, Beatrice lay awake in the ornate bedroom that felt more like a prison cell than a sanctuary. Her options were painfully limited. She could marry Edgar and secure her financial future at the cost of her freedom and happiness. Or she could refuse and face poverty and social ostracism. Or she could run. The thought returned unbidden, despite Hudson's rejection of the idea. She could leave Silver Creek behind, make her way to a larger city where no one knew her and find work. It would be hard, perhaps even dangerous for a woman alone, but at least it would be her choice. The funeral the next day was a somber affair, with most of the town turning out to pay respects to the victims of the Stagecoach accident. Edgar stood beside Beatrice at the graveside, his hand possessive at her elbow, as the preacher spoke words of comfort that felt hollow and rehearsed. Beatrice scanned the gathered mourners, hope flaring briefly when she spotted a tall figure at the back of the crowd. But it wasn't Hudson, just a ranch hand she didn't recognize. Of course, Hudson hadn't come. Why would he, after the way they'd parted? As the service ended and people began to disperse, Sheriff Caldwell approached Beatrice, hat in hand. "Miss Walters, my condolences for your loss." "Thank you, Sheriff," she replied, noting Edgar's tightening grip on her arm. "I thought you should know," Caldwell continued, his eyes flicking to Edgar, "that Quinn left town this morning, headed north as he said he would." Something inside Beatrice's chest constricted painfully. "I see, thank you for telling me." Edgar barely contained his satisfaction as he steered her toward the waiting carriage. "Good riddance to bad company. Now perhaps we can focus on our future without distractions." Back at the Morrison mansion, Beatrice excused herself to her room, claiming fatigue from the emotional day. Once alone, she allowed the tears she'd been holding back to fall freely. Hudson was gone, taking with him the brief, wild hope that had flared in her heart. She spent the next 2 days in a fog of indecision, wandering the grounds of Edgar's estate and avoiding her fiancé as much as possible. Each time they did interact, she noticed things about him that unsettled her, the way servants flinched when he raised his voice, his dismissive attitude toward the miners who came to the house on business, the cold calculation in his eyes when he looked at her. On the third night after the funeral, Beatrice woke to the sound of pebbles hitting her window. At first, she thought it was a branch in the wind, but the pattern was too regular, too deliberate. Cautiously, she rose from bed and peered out. Hudson Quinn stood in the moonlight below, Tempest waiting patiently behind him. When he saw her face at the window, he gestured for her to come down. Heart pounding, Beatrice threw a shawl over her nightdress and crept downstairs, careful to avoid the steps that creaked. The house was silent, Edgar and the servants long since retired for the night. She slipped out the side door and hurried across the lawn to where Hudson waited in the shadow of an oak tree. "I thought you were gone," she whispered, breathless with shock and hope. "I was," Hudson replied, his voice low. "Made it halfway to Helena before I realized I couldn't leave things as they were." "What changed your mind?" Hudson's gaze was intense in the moonlight. "I kept seeing your face, kept hearing you say you were walking into a cage. I've known men like Morrison my whole life, men who see people as possessions, as tools to be used and discarded. I couldn't bear the thought of you trapped with him." "So you came back," Beatrice said, hardly daring to believe it. "I came back," Hudson confirmed. "And I'm offering you a choice. Not running away in the night like thieves, but a real choice. I've spoken with a lawyer in Junction City about the contract between your father and Morrison." Beatrice's eyes widened. "What did he say?" "He said that while your father could promise your hand, the contract becomes void if you refuse to marry of your own free will. Morrison might be able to reclaim the debts he paid, but he can't force you to the altar." Hope flickered to life in Beatrice's chest. "But I have nothing. No money, no property." "You have me," Hudson said simply. "If you want me." Beatrice stared at him, scarcely able to breathe. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you," Hudson told her, the words falling between them like stones into still water. "I've never said that to anyone before, and I didn't expect to say it to you, but it's true. I love your courage, your kindness, your determination. And if you'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "Hudson," Beatrice whispered, tears filling her eyes. "I love you too. I think I have since the moment you reached for my hand in that stagecoach." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "It won't be an easy life. I'm not a rich man, but I've saved enough to buy a small ranch in Montana Territory. Good land with room to grow. We would build it together." "That sounds like freedom," Beatrice said, squeezing his hands. "That sounds like home." "Then come with me," Hudson urged. "Not tonight, that would only give Morrison ammunition against us, but tomorrow in broad daylight. Walk away on your own terms." Beatrice knew he was right. Slipping away in the night would make her look guilty, would give Edgar grounds to pursue them. But leaving openly, declaring her choice, that would be harder to fight. "Tomorrow," she agreed. "I'll tell Edgar in the morning, and then I'll meet you at the sheriff's office at noon." Hudson lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth spiraling through her. "Until tomorrow, then." "Until tomorrow," Beatrice echoed, reluctantly stepping back toward the house. She watched him mount Tempest and ride away, her heart lighter than it had been in years. For the first time since her father's death, she was making her own choice, forging her own path. Morning came too quickly and not quickly enough. Beatrice dressed with care in the simplest of her new dresses, a practical blue walking dress that would suit the journey ahead. She packed only essentials in a small valise, a change of clothes, her mother's locket, the few personal items she'd salvaged from the stagecoach accident. Edgar was in his study when she requested to speak with him, sitting behind an imposing desk with mining reports spread before him. He looked up with an indulgent smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Beatrice, my dear, have you come to discuss wedding plans at last?" "No, Edgar," she said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I've come to tell you that I cannot marry you." His smile vanished. "I thought we'd settled this matter." "You presented your view of the situation," Beatrice corrected. "But I've since learned that while my father may have promised my hand, the final choice remains mine." Edgar rose slowly from his chair, his face darkening. "Quinn, he's behind this, isn't he?" "I should have known that bastard wouldn't simply ride away." "Hudson helped me understand my rights," Beatrice acknowledged, "but the decision is mine alone." "Your rights?" Edgar laughed coldly. "Your right to what? Poverty, disgrace. Do you think anyone will respect you after you've broken a formal engagement to run off with a drifter?" "I think my happiness matters more than others' opinions," Beatrice replied, standing her ground despite the fury building in Edgar's expression. Edgar circled the desk, moving toward her with deliberate steps. "You're not leaving this house, Beatrice. You're certainly not leaving with him." For the first time, real fear crept into Beatrice's resolve. There was something dangerous in Edgar's eyes, something that suggested he wasn't accustomed to being denied what he wanted. "I am leaving," she said, backing toward the door. "Right now." Edgar moved with surprising speed for a man his size, grabbing her arm in a bruising grip. "You belong to me," he hissed. "Your father sold you to cover his debts, and I intend to collect." Beatrice struggled against his hold. "Let me go, you're hurting me." "This is nothing compared to what happens to women who shame their betrothed," Edgar snarled, his grip tightening. "Quinn has filled your head with romantic nonsense. He'll tire of you within a month, and then where will you be? Better abandoned in freedom than trapped in a loveless marriage," Beatrice retorted, fear giving way to anger. With sudden inspiration, she brought her heel down hard on Edgar's instep. He howled in pain, his grip loosening just enough for Beatrice to wrench free. She dashed for the door, but Edgar recovered quickly, lunging after her. "Mrs. Finch!" Beatrice screamed as she ran into the hallway. "Help me!" The housekeeper appeared from the kitchen, her eyes widening at the scene before her. Beatrice disheveled and frightened, Edgar pursuing her with rage contorting his features. "Mr. Morrison," Mrs. Finch gasped. "What on earth?" "Stay out of this, Finch," Edgar snapped. "Miss Walters is overwrought and needs to rest." "I need to leave," Beatrice countered, moving toward the front door. "And I'm leaving now." Edgar made another grab for her, but Mrs. Finch unexpectedly stepped between them. "Sir, I cannot allow you to manhandle a lady in this house." Edgar froze in shock at the elderly housekeeper's intervention. "How dare you interfere in my affairs?" "I've served this household for 20 years, Mrs. Finch replied stiffly. "Including during your first marriage, sir. I will not stand by and watch history repeat itself." A chill ran through Beatrice at the housekeeper's words. Edgar's first wife had died 3 years earlier of a fever, according to town gossip. "Go, Miss Walters," Mrs. Finch said quietly. "Quickly now." Beatrice didn't need to be told twice. She snatched up her valise from where she'd left it by the stairs and fled through the front door, Edgar's shouted threats following her down the gravel drive. She ran all the way into town, not daring to look back, expecting at any moment to hear hoofbeats or carriage wheels in pursuit. By the time she reached the sheriff's office, she was breathless and trembling. Hudson rose from his seat as she burst through the door, his expression shifting from hope to concern at her disheveled appearance. "Beatrice, what happened?" Sheriff Caldwell was equally alarmed, standing quickly. "Miss Walters, are you hurt?" "Edgar," she gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "He tried to stop me. He grabbed me." She pushed up her sleeve to reveal the reddening marks on her arm where Edgar's fingers had dug into her flesh. Hudson's face darkened dangerously. "I'll kill him," he said quietly. "No, you won't," Sheriff Caldwell said firmly, though his own expression had hardened at the sight of Beatrice's bruises. "But I will have a word with Mr. Morrison about assaulting women." "We need to leave," Beatrice urged, looking to Hudson. "Before he comes after me." He was like a madman. Mrs. Finch's housekeeper, she helped me get away." Hudson nodded, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "We're ready. Horses are saddled behind the office. Sheriff Caldwell has kindly agreed to witness our marriage before we depart." Beatrice looked up in surprise. "Marriage, now, if you'll have me," Hudson said softly. "I thought it might make the journey more proper, and it would give Morrison less ground to pursue you." "It's your choice, Miss Walters," Caldwell added. "I've sent for Reverend Thompson. He should be here any minute." Beatrice looked between the two men, then at the simple gold band Hudson had produced from his pocket. It wasn't the lavish ceremony her father had envisioned for her, but it was honest and real and chosen freely. "Yes," she said, her voice strengthening. Yes, I'll marry you, Hudson Quinn. The ceremony was brief and simple, performed in the sheriff's office with Caldwell and his deputy as witnesses. Beatrice wore her blue traveling dress, and Hudson wore the cleanest of his work shirts. The reverend spoke the traditional words, and when Hudson slipped the ring onto Beatrice's finger, his hands were steady and sure. By the power vested in me, Reverend Thompson concluded, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Hudson's kiss was gentle but full of promise, and Beatrice felt the last of her doubts melt away. This was right. This was where she belonged. They left Silver Creek within the hour, riding north toward Montana territory and the land Hudson had described. Sheriff Caldwell accompanied them to the edge of town, where they paused for a final farewell. I've written out a statement about what I witnessed today, Caldwell told them, handing Hudson a folded document. Morrison's influence doesn't extend beyond this county. This should help if he tries to make trouble for you. Thank you, Frank, Hudson said, tucking the paper into his saddlebag, for everything. Just be good to her, Caldwell replied. She deserves that. I intend to be, Hudson promised. As they rode away from Silver Creek, Beatrice felt a curious mixture of emotions, fear and exhilaration, sadness and joy, endings and beginnings all tangled together. The mountains ahead were vast and imposing, but with Hudson riding beside her, they seemed more like a promise than a barrier. Are you afraid? Hudson asked as they made camp that first night, a small fire crackling between them. A little, Beatrice admitted, but not of the future, just of the unknown. Hudson reached across the fire to take her hand. I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise that you'll never be a possession to me, only a partner. That's all I want, Beatrice said, squeezing his hand. A chance to build something together. That night, under a canopy of stars, Hudson and Beatrice consummated their marriage with tender, unhurried touches. There was awkwardness and laughter, passion and discovery, as they learned each other's bodies and desires. And when they lay tangled together afterward, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Their journey to Montana took 2 weeks, through mountainous terrain and sprawling valleys. Along the way, Hudson taught Beatrice the skills she would need in their new life: how to set a snare for rabbits, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to make a fire with minimal supplies. You're a quick learner, he observed one evening as she successfully gutted a trout he'd caught in a nearby stream. I've always been practical, Beatrice replied, pleased with his praise. Father wanted me to be a proper lady, but Mother taught me useful skills when he wasn't looking. Hudson smiled, watching her work. Tell me about them, your parents. As they traveled, they shared their histories, filling in the spaces between them with stories and memories. Hudson spoke of his childhood on a struggling Texas ranch, his years as a Union scout during the war, his wandering life afterward. Beatrice told him about growing up on her father's ranch, about her mother's death when she was 16, about the gradual decline of their fortunes that had led to her father's desperate bargain with Edgar Morrison. I wish I could have met your mother, Hudson said. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She would have liked you, Beatrice assured him. She always said I should marry a man who saw me clearly, not just the version of me he wanted to see. By the time they reached the land, Hudson had purchased sight unseen 80 acres of rolling grassland with a creek running through it, and a stand of pines along the northern border. Beatrice felt as though she'd known him all her life. The ranch was little more than a rough claim, with only a single-room cabin that had seen better days. But as Hudson lifted her from her horse and carried her across the threshold, Beatrice saw not what it was, but what it could become. Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn, he said, setting her down gently. It's perfect, she replied, meaning it despite the leaking roof and drafty walls. "It's ours." That first winter tested them both. The cabin needed extensive repairs before the snow flew, and their supplies were limited. They worked from dawn until dusk, Hudson teaching Beatrice everything he knew about building and fixing, while she applied her mother's lessons in stretching provisions and making do with little. There were difficult days when game was scarce, when the wind howled through cracks they hadn't yet sealed, when exhaustion made them short-tempered. But there were beautiful moments to Hudson's face when he returned from a hunting trip to find Beatrice had fashioned curtains from an old dress. Beatrice's delight when Hudson surprised her with a rocking chair he'd traded for in the nearest settlement. Nights spent planning their future by firelight, dreaming of cattle and crops and children. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities. They planted a small garden, built a proper corral for the horses, and began the arduous process of clearing land for pasture. Hudson found work breaking horses for neighboring ranches, bringing in much-needed cash, while Beatrice turned their cabin into a home. In June, nearly 9 months after they'd fled Silver Creek, Sheriff Caldwell rode up to their homestead, his arrival causing momentary panic until they saw his friendly wave. "Quite a place you're building here," he observed, accepting the coffee Beatrice offered. "Almost didn't recognize it from Hudson's description." "It's coming along," Hudson agreed, pride evident in his voice. "What brings you all this way, Frank?" Caldwell's expression sobered. "Thought you should know Edgar Morrison is dead." Beatrice nearly dropped the cup she was holding. "Dead?" "How?" "Mining accident officially," Caldwell replied. "Though there are whispers. Seems he'd made enemies among his workers. Conditions at the mine had deteriorated badly after you left, Mrs. Quinn. Men working double shifts, safety precautions ignored." "And unofficially?" Hudson asked quietly. Caldwell shrugged. "The support beam that fell on him might have had some help. Can't prove anything, and no one's looking too hard. His mine foreman, Jennings, has taken over operations, and conditions have already improved." Beatrice sat down heavily. "I don't know what to feel." "You don't have to feel anything," Hudson told her gently, "except perhaps relief that he can't threaten you anymore." Caldwell stayed the night before continuing on to Helena on official business. After he'd gone, Beatrice and Hudson sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Are you all right?" Hudson asked, his arm around her shoulders. Beatrice considered the question carefully. "Yes," she finally said. "I'm sad that his life ended that way, but I can't pretend I'm sorry he's gone. Does that make me terrible?" "It makes you honest," Hudson replied. "And that's one of the things I love most about you." She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I've been meaning to tell you something. I've been waiting for the right moment." Hudson looked down at her, eyebrow raised. "Should I be worried?" "Not at all," Beatrice smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby come winter." The expression that bloomed across Hudson's face was one Beatrice knew she would remember for the rest of her life. Wonder and joy and love so powerful, it seemed to illuminate him from within. "A baby," he repeated, his voice reverent. "Our baby. Our baby," Beatrice confirmed. "The first of many, I hope." Hudson gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "A home, a family, a woman who loves me. When I saw that stagecoach heading for the ravine, I was just doing what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Beatrice corrected, framing his face with her hands. "Only you, only the man I was meant to find." Their daughter, Clara, was born on a snowy December night with the help of a neighboring rancher's wife. She had Hudson's blue eyes and Beatrice's determined chin, and from her first breath, She was the center of their world. As Clara grew, so did the Quinn ranch. By the time she was 5, they had a proper house with 3 bedrooms, a small herd of cattle, and enough success to hire a ranch hand to help Hudson with the heavier work. On warm evenings, they still sat on the porch, now expanded and furnished with comfortable chairs, watching the sunset and counting their blessings. Sometimes, Hudson would tell Clara the story of how he'd met her mother, though the more dramatic details would wait until she was older. "And then the stagecoach skidded toward the ravine," he'd say, Clara's eyes wide with excitement, though she'd heard it many times. "And I leapt from my horse and yanked your mama free." "And then you fell in love," Clara would prompt, always wanting that part of the story. "Yes," Hudson would agree, meeting Beatrice's eyes over their daughter's head. "Then we fell in love." On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, with Clara asleep inside, and their 2-year-old son James, named for Beatrice's father, tucked into his crib, Hudson and Beatrice sat hand in hand on their porch, watching a meteor shower streak across the Montana sky. "Any regrets?" Hudson asked, the question a ritual between them now. "Not one," Beatrice replied, as she always did. "You?" Hudson smiled, lifting her hand to his lips. "Only that I didn't find you sooner." "You found me exactly when I needed you most," Beatrice reminded him. "When the stagecoach was heading for disaster." "I think it was you who found me," Hudson countered. "I was just passing through, as always. You were the one who made me stay." Beatrice leaned her head against his shoulder, content in the life they'd built together. From disaster had come deliverance. From chance had come choice. From a moment of courage had come a lifetime of love. And as the stars continued their ancient dance overhead, Beatrice Quinn knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with the man who had reached for her hand when it mattered most, and had never let go.